Another thing that could be really helpful, Nick, is to make a dream board. That's something we've had clients do in the past. And a dream board is whenever you go through magazines and internet articles and you print pictures or you cut out pictures that capture these elements of the future that you hope to have for yourself. Poems, excerpts, and you put all this on a poster board and you hang this in your room. And that way, every time you look at it, you're reminded of the destiny ahead of you, of the things you're working toward. That's the stuff that will get you through. But remind yourself that your present is not your future, that your destiny, your destination is not your current predicament, and that anticipation often feels like frustration. But this is a Barstow problem, and you're on your way to somewhere better.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you for writing in.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. When we come back, we will answer a question about therapeutic modalities. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
Hey, TheraPals. How would you like to be a part of a live recording of Pod Therapy? Of course you would. You can, and a whole lot more, when you buy your ticket to Scoop Fest 2018. This is the third annual Scoop Fest, put on by our friends Matt, Paul, and Jacob from the Ice Cream Social podcast. A weekend-long comedy and podcast festival in beautiful Las Vegas, Nevada, coming up on October 12th through the 14th. Enjoy live comedy, variety shows, the Scoop Talent Show. I know Jim's preparing for that. He's getting super excited. And the Jock vs. Nerd Costume Ball, and much, much more, including live recordings of Matt and Mattingly's Ice Cream Social, Pod Therapy, and some of your other favorite podcasts. So get your tickets now. Go on over to heyscoops.com. There will be a discount code for our listeners. That code is therapy. So that's heyscoops.com, discount code therapy. Get your tickets today. All right, we're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy. Our next listener writes in anonymously and is asking about therapeutic models.
Okay, this letter says, is CBT the same as DBT? So CBT, just before we even read the question, is cognitive behavioral therapy, and DBT is dialectical behavioral therapy. So he's asking, are these the same? Or she, I don't know, it's anonymous. Okay, here's the letter. In the latest episode, there was talk of using cognitive behavioral therapy to help clients. In therapy, I've used dialectical behavioral therapy as a way to help with anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem issues. Are there benefits in using one over the other? Thank you. Anonymous.
Okay. Yeah, they are a little bit different. So DBT, and I'm just going to give my best explanation behind this. I've had no actual formal training in DBT, but I know enough about it to kind of give you the basic understanding, basic description. So within DBT, there are components of cognitive behavioral therapy. The big thing that DBT is used for, it was created actually by Marsha Linehan, who herself was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She developed this because so many therapists were really getting fatigued and burnt out working with this one population. So she tried finding something that was going to be beneficial. DBT, the dialectical part of it, really kind of focuses on the balance between acceptance and change. Mm-hmm. So that's where DBT is a little bit different than CBT. It has that extra focus. So it's hard to explain, but basically it's being able to identify what things we are going to have to learn how to accept and what things we are going to actively work on behavioral change to create a different outcome. So are there benefits to using one over the other? Yes, both can be very effective. DBT is especially effective when working with individuals who struggle with emotional regulation. So if that describes you, DBT might be a good therapeutic model for you. One of the things also that's important with DBT is that DBT also has with it, in addition to individual therapy, you would be doing skills groups. And these skills groups really focus on the development and use of DBT skills that then would be used in conjunction with therapy. CBT doesn't really have that necessarily. You can do CBT in just individual sessions, but DBT, it has that extra component, that group skills component, which is very important.
Yeah, so the essence of it is this. DBT is a form of CBT. So again, we like to define terms on this show. So cognitive behavioral therapy was this psychotherapeutic technique developed by Dr. Aaron Beck. And Dr. Beck at the time was really studying depression and anxiety. And if you've ever had depression or anxiety, it feels like it's like coming out of nowhere. And it's really frustrating when somebody says, hey, if you just cheer up, or hey, calm down. And it feels like, dude, it's hard to explain. It's outside of my control. I don't have the ability to deal with this. Dr. Beck realized that there was kind of like this chain reaction of things that sort of lead to that experience. And he sort of revealed to us how the brain works, that a situation or event might happen. We might have like an automatic thought to that. And if we choose to believe that emotion or that automatic thought, we might enter into a cognitive distortion, which we talked about earlier in the show, which is a false interpretation of reality. It's like a funhouse mirror version of reality. And he said, hey, if you're wearing these beer goggles interpretation of the world, you're going to bump into stuff and you're going to experience life poorly and you're going to have anxiety, you're going to have depression, you might drink too much, you're going to have these problems. What happened with DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, was that while CBT is very effective, it's particularly difficult to use it with people who have borderline personality disorder. So borderline personality disorder, which we've covered in a previous episode, is sort of that I hate you or I love you, don't leave me, right? Mm-hmm. It's that disability to balance boundaries with other people in your life. And you have this pattern of self-destructive social behavior where you cling to people and let them into your world way too quickly and give them way too much power, and then also forcefully, explosively push them away and sort of eviscerate relationships at the drop of a hat as well. And so it's this explosive and also very grasping sort of personality habit, which we call borderline personality disorder. So the reason that we call this a dialectic is actually a reference to Hegelian philosophy. So Hegel wrote a form of philosophy called the dialectic, and basically his argument was you can take a thesis, which is a statement of truth, and an antithesis or an antithesis, which is the exact opposite of that truth, and if you bring those together in conversation, the real reality is usually somewhere in the middle.
So opposites can coexist.
Yes, let these two things coexist together, and you'll find that a lot of truth is revealed by fusing together two contradictory things. So whenever dialectic behavioral therapy was created, it was with that concept of the borderline person who is at once in love with you and also contradictorily the antithesis of love, absolute hate with you, and is capable of flipping very violently between the two. So dialectical tries to fuse these two together to create normal, healthy boundary relationships, which is why a big part of it that makes it different than CBT can be done individually and may use groups. That's fine. Mm-hmm. DBT doesn't want to be done individually.
Right.
DBT wants groups, and it has a strong emphasis on what we call psychosocial, which is that psychology of how humans interact with each other. And a lot of the skills that you're building actually have to do with how to fuse people back together in healthy boundaries by comparing those two opposites.
Yeah. So with the opposites, to kind of give you an example, mom says she loves me, but she's mad at me because of this behavior I did.
Right.
For people who struggle with that, this is where DBT would be beneficial. These two are opposites, but they can coexist.
Yeah.
It's working on fusing those two together and understanding they fit together.
Yeah. And the other part of the question was about one thing being more useful than the other. And here's a fascinating fact that a lot of our listeners don't know, but every clinician had to learn this at one point. So whenever we're going through our studies in graduate school and we're learning about psychotherapy and about different techniques, there comes a time when you take a class where they introduce you to like a dozen different techniques. And it's really funny because one of the first things they warn you is there is no technique that's better than the other techniques. And that's very confusing because all the techniques beat the placebo, right? Like all of them beat nothing. And all of them beat non-evidence-based ideas, like just throwing a book at it, or let's go out and just do push-ups, or coming up with some dumb idea. All the techniques that are evidence-based, that are good psychology, science-based, they are effective, but we've never seen that any of them are more effective than the others for everything. CBT has like a really good winning record when it comes to things like depression and anxiety. DBT has a really strong record when it comes to borderline. So they have different areas where they're the best approach. And I usually compare it to MMA fighting, right? So like UFC, two people go in the cage and they're allowed to punch, they're allowed to kick, they're allowed to wrestle, they're allowed to throw people, they're allowed to do anything they want as long as they beat up the bad guy. And that's how psychotherapy is. We all have different approaches, just like some people use karate, some people use boxing, some people use wrestling. Some clinicians will use cognitive behavioral therapy. Some will use solution-focused brief treatments. Some will use systems modalities like family systems theory. Some will use narrative therapy. I mean, there's all these different ideas. There's Adlerian therapy. There's Freudian psychoanalysis. And I'd love to eventually do a show where we just one by one explain what these are. But I just know the listener would fall asleep. So I'm nerding out over here, Nick.
Sorry,
I need
I
you to rescue
listening.
me.
What?
Yeah. I'm not listening.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. I promise our live show will be way more entertaining than Jim providing a lecture on all the different forms of psychotherapy and why they're different and what they're good at. But suffice it to say, the answer to the question of is one better than the other? No, they're not. If you have a skilled clinician who utilizes one effectively, they will probably beat the problem.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
That's all the time that we've got for this week's session. Thank you to those who contributed to our show today. We really appreciate it. Remember, pod therapy isn't something you should keep all to yourself. Help us reach others by sharing this episode. You can find us at facebook.com/podtherapy or on Twitter @PodTherapyGuys.
Do you want to add your own advice to today's questions? Post your thoughts at podtherapy.net and join the conversation. I'm Nick Tangeman.
I'm Dr. Aaron Beck.
Thanks, and we'll see you for an appointment next week. And don't forget to buy tickets for Scoop Fest 2018. HeyScoops.com, discount code therapy.